Hello everybody, here we are today talking about Cale Makar if he'll win the Norris for the second time in his career this season. But before we get started with that, please make sure to subscribe if you're new to me or hockey, whatever the case may be. Being said, let's get on into it. So my voice does feel a little bit better compared to yesterday, and I know some of you are probably confused as well as the fact you normally see me in a crew neck and a hat or a beanie, but I had to wear a suit today. But anyway, we're going to be talking about Cale in today's video. Now, Cale is a vegetable you may or may not like. Cale is also an NHL defenseman you may or may not like. But the point is, just like Captain Jack Sparrow, you have heard of him. And in this case, the 26-year-old is once again having another really good year and is once again in the Norris conversation. But at this stage of the year, I do think that we might be able to ask, is the award his to lose? Is he the front runner? Now, while there still is certainly a lot of hockey left to be played, I do think we can probably name Cale as a finalist for the Norris, which means we have to figure out who the two others will be. And I hate to kind of go this route, but we'll probably be looking at points in this regard. And right now you'd have Zach Werenski and Quinn Hughes as his competition. Now, starting off with Zach Werenski would be a really good storyline to see him go out there and win the Norris. This was a guy drafted by Columbus that was part of a franchise that hadn't really done a lot, and then they became a consistent playoff team for a good chunk of the 2010s, also winning their first playoff series and this time. And then you have kind of the bad years that followed. A lot of these guys ended up leaving. Timmy Panarin, Sergei Bobrovsky, Seth Jones was traded. And yet Werenski is a mainstay of this team, kind of a tie back to the past, if you will, to a little bit more of a fun time. But I think that the Jackets are actually a really fun team for the moment, as seen as a rising side out in the Eastern Conference. And Zach is a part of that. He is certainly getting paid quite a bit of money to stay there, granted, but he has stayed and is now part of this side that in the coming years could be a threat. And with Zach, he is having a career year. Kind of makes you wonder if he'll get better in the coming years. And you say, man, this would just be a great storyline to see the Jackets make the playoffs and him win the Norris all in a relatively short time after them being a pretty bad team over the past couple of seasons. But I think there are a couple of reasons that are really holding Zach back at the moment. One of those things being the fact that the Jackets may not go out there and make the playoffs. And in that sense, I think it would hurt him because Erik Karlsson was really the only other blue liner that I could find that won the Norris while being on a side that didn't make the playoffs. And I don't really like the idea of blaming a player on a bad team for not getting an award or saying, oh, we're going to attribute that failure to you when you still had a good year. But it kind of seems like it holds true that if you win an award like the Norris, I was going back all the way in the 70s, and unless I missed something, couldn't really find anybody else that had won the Norris while not making the playoffs. And another big problem that I see here for Zach is the fact that Erik Karlsson did it while breaking the 100-point barrier. That was something that hadn't been done in like 30 years for a blue liner. Eric breaks that, and that was cool, but at the same time, you realize Zach is probably going to finish about 85 to 90 points, and you can go out there and win it in that way, but I think at the same time as well, too, his expected results are worse compared to his actual results, and if things kind of shuffle down a little bit further and may not look as pretty, and I don't think that he has as much of an impact defensively as you're hoping for, although mind you, I'm just going to say this right now, none of these three candidates are probably the best defensive defensemen in the league by any means. There are guys that are really flying under the radar. Maybe we should do a video about that one day, but not having necessarily a monster year, not making the playoffs could really hold back Zach's potential to win the Norris. Now, this throws us back to Quinn Hughes. Now, Quinn is interesting because he won the Norris last year. Now, does that mean that he necessarily deserves to win it this year based off of that fact alone? Absolutely not. But Quinn Hughes is a really good player, and I know people are going to look at this and say biased, but I do want to look at the fact that Quinn is just having another really productive year, especially at 5-on-5 over Vancouver, and is pretty much, I think, flying under the radar in some ways because some of those numbers may not be as big as you'd like them to see. But the reality is when you're looking at a lot of those underlying numbers and the value that he brings to the team is just crazy. Even if you look at some of the things like how many goals the Vancouver Canucks score when he's on the ice versus off, for just the goals for percentage is absolutely insane in that regard. And I think that this team would like to go out there and just constantly keep cloning him, so to have the possibility to have the narrative of, oh, he could repeat as a Norris winner after Vancouver had never had a Norris winner before, while also being a guy that helps possibly save Vancouver's season, really would work in his favor. But I think there are a couple of things that are kind of holding him back at the moment. One of those things being, again, what we talked about with Zach Werenski. Vancouver may not make the playoffs. They are really only in competition with Calgary for that wild card spot, that final wild card spot. But if they miss, would you want to give a defenseman the Norris after his team went from first in the division to being out of the playoffs the next year? Probably not. And then another thing kind of holding him back at the moment is his recent injury that he's dealing with. He's already missed more games than a player like Cale. He has only played 47 games for the course of the year. And if he misses more time, it's just hard because when you're a player that's dealing with an injury, you're probably not going to be as productive as what you were when you're fully healthy. But if you're completely out of the lineup, you're just not able to maintain the closest there unless somebody just had a horrendous streak where they weren't able to get anything on the board. So I think for Quinn, if he does have lingering health issues and is out of the lineup, he certainly is going to be out of the running, even though his SPAR or his GAR, whatever you want to look at here, is really good for the course of the year. It just comes down to, are you in the lineup enough to really justify you winning the Norris? Now, as for a guy like Cale, I think that you can probably look at the more traditional things like goals and points and say he probably will lead all defensemen by the end of the year. And on top of that, too, he is playing more of that traditional role as he's getting way more time compared to a guy like Quinn Hughes on the PK. There are guys that have played more minutes, certainly, but if you look at this as a defenseman award, you might say, well, Quinn Hughes is very sheltered in his role, and he hardly ever has to play on the PK. Even though that's not really totally his fault by any means, I think from a more traditionalist perspective, it is nice to know Cale can kind of be what you need him to be. I don't think Quinn necessarily wouldn't be what you need him to be, but I think Cale fits more of that narrative, not to the total extent, but he is a guy that is just eating a lot of minutes for them and providing a ton of value. But I think a lot of people probably are going to be looking back to, well, let's just give it to the player that has the best offensive year, because that's where it seems like the Norris is heading. And again, you circle back to Cale probably being that guy. But he is just a player that can go on a run where he has a bunch of multi-point nights and is just dominant and shows you why the Avs made sure that he's going to be sticking around with them. And it's just crazy to see how just like that, he was able to instantly jump into the NHL and find success and average over a point per game for his career and be in a spot where he is a Norris contender at 26 years old. He's 26 years old, absolutely insane to me. So for him, you have a lot of categories where it is, again, he'll play the PK, he'll lead in goals, which is kind of an interesting thing. He'll lead in points too, and is going to be in a spot where the third man, the third finalist, may have a bigger gap between them, and the guy that's second could miss significant time. So I do think at the moment Cale is probably the front runner, but I do think that Quinn does have the opportunity to make this a little bit closer. One argument you probably could make for a guy like Quinn is the fact that Philip Hronek, a guy that he gets paired with a lot, has also been out of the lineup for a good chunk of the year. So if one of your defensemen that you just get to be a pairing for a good chunk of time is gone, that is a little bit more defendable. And then, of course, too, Taze and Makar have played a ton of minutes together compared to them. They've played over 1,000 minutes together for the course of the year. Some people might look at some of those arguments of, oh, well, looking at offensive zone starts at 5-on-5, Cale's got nearly the double of the offensive zone starts of a guy like Quinn. And you just have more and more of an ability to argue and reason and whatnot as to who should win that. And I think it's actually a good thing. This isn't like even a few years ago where you kind of looked at some of the stats and you would say, oh, I feel this. You have a lot of that underlying numbers that really bring things into perspective, and you just have the ability to make more of an argument one way or the other. And I think to have a more educated guess as you could go out there and win it, and I am enthralled by that. At the end of the day, I really don't mind who wins this for the most part. I'm not one of those people that freak out if a player that I want to win the award doesn't. I think Werenski, Makar, or Quinn would make a great case for this, and I think as well, too, it's just fun to kind of have that narrative of Quinn Hughes and Cale Makar being contenders for the Norris year in and year out. I said that in a video, I think, this past summer, saying these two could very well be contending for years out west for the Norris, and I think that makes things very, very interesting between the two. One thing that you might be able to argue as to why Cale could go out there and win on top of this is saying, well, he had a really good last year. He is a good guy just overall, and Quinn won it last year, so we need to give it to a guy like Makar because he really deserves it, even though Quinn might be really close to him. Not saying that's necessarily the case, but I do think at times you kind of get that fatigue in voting, even though I think it is just a bunch of nonsense. But at the end of the day, I truly think that what it comes down to is Cale will probably be healthy. The Avs will probably go out to the playoffs, and he will put up numbers that will, again, make people say he is deserving of the Norris, and other guys can try to go out there and march on their way to defend it. But I think, especially for a guy like Werenski, it's just going to be very tough because you're relying on a ton of other things that might not go your way. So yes, for this, I'm basically going to say that I do think Cale is my pick to win the Norris with about 30 games, a little less than 30 games to go for the year. But I do want to know your thoughts down below. Let me know in the comments. Also, again, please make sure to like this video if you enjoyed it and subscribe if you're new. Again, I apologize, my voice kind of been a little bit weird over the past few days. And also, I'm just very frustrated because I tried to record this video literally before this, and then the storage on my recording thing was too full. So it didn't even record. So this is not as good as I feel like my previous recording, but we'll ignore that. Anyway, everybody, please make sure to stay safe. Have a great night, and you go Valky, all right. Goodbye, Brigadiers and Brigadettes. This is your captain signing off. Have a great night.